Hello listeners. Welcome to another podcast on world history. Today I will talk about the Achaemenid Empire, which falls under the Persian Empire. This content is about to discuss the Achaemenid as the first global empire and discuss how the central government provided cultural and economic reform. So, let's get started. The Achaemenid Empire. Under Cyrus the Great and Darius the Great, the Achaemenid Empire became the first global empire. The Achaemenid Empire, c. 550 to 330 BCE, or First Persian Empire, was founded in the 6th century BCE by Cyrus the Great, in Western and Central Asia. The dynasty drew its name from Achaemenes, who, from 705 to 675 BCE, ruled Persis, which was land bounded on the west by the Tigris River and on the south by the Persian Gulf. It was the first centralized nation-state, and during expansion in approximately 550 to 500 BCE, it became the first global empire and eventually ruled over significant portions of the ancient world. Empire beginnings. By the 7th century BCE, a group of ancient Iranian people had established the Median Empire, a vassal state under the Assyrian Empire that later tried to gain its independence in the 8th century BCE. After Assyria fell in 605 BCE, Cyaxares, king of the Medes, extended his rule west across Iran. Around 550 BCE, Cyrus II of Persia, who became known as Cyrus the Great, rose in rebellion against the Median Empire, eventually conquering the Medes to create the First Persian Empire, also known as the Achaemenid Empire. Cyrus utilized his tactical genius, as well as his understanding of the socio-political conditions governing his territories, to eventually assimilate the neighboring Lydian and Neo-Babylonian empires into the new Persian Empire. Achaemenid expansion. The empire was ruled by a series of monarchs who joined its disparate tribes by constructing a complex network of roads. The unified form of the empire came in the form of a central administration around the city of Pasargati, which was erected by Cyrus c. 550 BCE. After his death in 530 BCE, Cyrus was succeeded by his son Cambyses II, who conquered Egypt, Nubia, and Cyrenaica in 525 BCE. He died in 522 BCE during a revolt. During the king's long absence during his expansion campaign, a Zoroastrian priest, named Gwamada, staged a coup by impersonating Cambyses II's younger brother, Bardiya, and seized the throne. Yet in 522 BCE, Darius I, also known as Darius the Great, overthrew Gwamada and solidified control of the territories of the Achaemenid Empire, beginning what would be a historic consolidation of lands. Between c. 500 to 400 BCE, Darius the Great and his son, Xerxes, ruled the Persian plateau and all of the territories formerly held by the Assyrian Empire, including Mesopotamia, the Levant, and Cyprus. It eventually came to control Egypt, as well. This expansion continued even further afield with Anatolia and the Armenian Plateau, much of the southern Caucasus, Macedonia, parts of Greece and Thrace, Central Asia as far as the Aral Sea, the Oxus and Jaxartes areas, the Hindu Kush and the western Indus Basin, and parts of northern Arabia and northern Libya. This unprecedented area of control under a single ruler stretched from the Indus Valley in the east to Thrace and Macedon on the northeastern border of Greece. At its height, the Achaemenid Empire ruled over 44% of the world's population, the highest such figure for any empire in history. Government and trade in the Achaemenid Empire. Emperors Cyrus II and Darius I created a centralized government and extensive trade network in the Achaemenid Empire. The Achaemenid Empire reached enormous size under the leadership of Cyrus II of Persia, 576 to 530 BCE, commonly known as Cyrus the Great, who created a multi-state empire. Called Cyrus the Elder by the Greeks, he founded an empire initially comprising all the previous civilized states of the ancient Near East and eventually most of Southwest and Central Asia and the Caucasus region, stretching from the Mediterranean Sea to the Indus River. Control of this large territory involved a centralized government, territorial monarchs who served as proxy rulers for the emperor, and an extensive system of commerce and trade. Government organization. Cyrus, whose rule lasted between 29 and 31 years, until his death in battle in 530 BCE, controlled the vast Achaemenid Empire through the use of regional monarchs, called satrap, who each oversaw a territory called a satrapy. The basic rule of governance was based upon the loyalty and obedience of the satrapy to the central power, the king, and compliance with tax laws. Cyrus also connected the various regions of the empire through an innovative postal system that made use of an extensive roadway and relay stations. Cyrus the Great was recognized for achievements in human rights and politics, having influenced both Eastern and Western civilization. The ancient Babylonians called him the Liberator, while the modern nation of Iran calls Cyrus its father. Cyrus Cylinder. The Cyrus cylinder is an ancient clay artifact, now broken into several fragments, that has been called the oldest known charter of universal human rights and a symbol of his humanitarian rule. The cylinder dates from the 6th century BCE, and was discovered in the ruins of Babylon in Mesopotamia, now Iraq, in 1879. In addition to describing the genealogy of Cyrus, the declaration in Akkadian cuneiform script on the cylinder is considered by many biblical scholars to be evidence of Cyrus's policy of repatriation of the Jewish people following their captivity in Babylon. The historical nature of the cylinder has been debated, with some scholars arguing that Cyrus did not make a specific decree, but rather that the cylinder articulated his general policy allowing exiles to return to their homelands and rebuild their temples. In fact, the policies of Cyrus with respect to treatment of minority religions were well documented in Babylonian texts, as well as in Jewish sources. Cyrus was known to have an overall attitude of religious tolerance throughout the empire, although it has been debated whether this was by his own implementation or a continuation of Babylonian and Assyrian policies. Darius Improvements. When Darius I, 550 to 486 BCE, also known as Darius the Great, ascended the throne of the Achaemenid Empire in 522 BCE, he established Aramaic as the official language and devised a codification of laws for Egypt. Darius also sponsored work on construction projects throughout the empire, focusing on improvement of the cities of Susa, Pasargadae, Persepolis, Babylon, and various municipalities in Egypt. When Darius moved his capital from Pasargadae to Persepolis, he revolutionized the economy by placing it on a silver and gold coinage and introducing a regulated and sustainable tax system. This structure precisely tailored the taxes of each satrapy based on its projected productivity and economic potential. For example, Babylon was assessed for the highest amount of silver taxes, while Egypt owed grain in addition to silver taxes. Bihistan Inscription. Sometime after his coronation, Darius ordered an inscription to be carved on a limestone cliff of Mount Bihistan in modern Iran. The Bihistan Inscription, the text of which Darius wrote, came to have great linguistic significance as a crucial clue in deciphering cuneiform script. The inscription begins by tracing the ancestry of Darius, followed by a description of a sequence of events following the deaths of the previous two Achaemenid emperors, Cyrus the Great and Cyrus's son, Cambyses II, in which Darius fought 19 battles in 1 year to put down numerous rebellions throughout the Persian lands. The inscription, which is approximately 15 meters high and 25 meters wide, includes 3 versions of the text in 3 different cuneiform languages, Old Persian, Elamite, and Babylonian, which was a version of Akkadian. Researchers were able to compare the scripts and use it to help decipher ancient languages, in this way making the Bihistan inscription as valuable to cuneiform as the Rosetta Stone is to Egyptian hieroglyphs. Commerce and trade. Under the Achaemenids, trade was extensive and there was an efficient infrastructure that facilitated the exchange of commodities in the far reaches of the empire. Tariffs on trade were one of the empire's main sources of revenue, in addition to agriculture and tribute. The satrapies were linked by a 2,500-kilometer highway, the most impressive stretch of which was the Royal Road, from Susa to Sardis. The relays of mounted couriers could reach the most remote areas in 15 days. Despite the relative local independence afforded by the satrapy system, royal inspectors regularly toured the empire and reported on local conditions using this route. Military. Cyrus the Great created an organized army to enforce national authority. Despite the ethno-cultural diversity among the subject nations, the empire's enormous geographic size, and the constant struggle for power by regional competitors. This professional army included the Immortals unit, comprising 10,000 highly trained heavy infantry. Under Darius the Great, Persia would become the first empire to inaugurate and deploy an imperial navy, with personnel that included Phoenicians, Egyptians, Cypriots, and Greeks. Thank you for listening. Don't forget to check out other tracks as well. Show your love by hitting the subscribe button and do like, comment and share, to spread knowledge. See you next time. Till then, keep learning for fun.